It is an honor to be here. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves in spite of the temperamental weather. I am joined today by anyone who somehow does not know, by the amazing Sandi Toksvig and the incredible Adjoa Andoh. My name is Victoria Princewill. Whilst these two women need no introduction, I'm actually going to give you a little bit of an overview of their background because the topic today is historical fiction, and I think their insight, their expertise, their experience is worth hearing about before we even hear from their actual thoughts themselves. So, first we have Adjoa. She is a noted thespian. You may remember her as Lady Danbury in Netflix's smash hit Bridgerton. A global hit in 82 million homes worldwide. Her acting career spans an array of media, TV, radio, film, theatre, and she has long been acquainted with historical drama. In particular, she is known for her role conceiving, design, conceiving, creating, and playing the lead in Richard II at the Shakespeare Globe. It is an incredible performance. It is the first time that you had an all women of colour performance in the UK. She has been nominated for a Screen Actors Guild Award and by the NAACP for her role in Bridgerton, and I'm pretty thrilled to have her here on the stage. We next obviously have Sandi, who I have a very formal bit written here. She's so informal that I'm kind of just like, we have Sandi and she's great. She has written this amazing book that I do want to talk about today. It's an almanac, and I find it fascinating because it's basically a framework for information and knowledge, and she's used it to tell the stories of forgotten women throughout history. And they're just these really incredible stories. So I think on top of just a long, illustrious career, this is a really fascinating way to get information about forgotten people into the world. And I'm really interested in interrogating how they both explore and navigate historical fiction going forward. So first question for both of you, how is historical fiction important to you as artists, as individuals, and maybe in a political way? Because I feel as though we live in a world that is both seduced by the flamboyance of it all, but also kind of connected to the deeper, darker stories. And I'm noting that you have used historical fiction in Richard II to tell a story that arguably feels more true by bringing in a really modern relevance. You know, I think to myself of what you've talked about in the past about how you felt this needs to happen during Brexit, how, you know, you have Richard with this like fly whisk and evoking these kind of like African leader narratives, evoking, you know, narratives from like the South, you know, Southeast Asia. And I think this makes a very global story. And then I think of, you know, the almanac and just the very fact that you're bringing these stories that have been forgotten and you're telling them in a very light-hearted way. I was reading them and they just felt so dark, but you managed to really kind of like sweep that away and make it kind of witty and fun. And so I think for both of you personally as artists, for the, you know, the political world that we live in this moment, and for a world that's been obsessed with like historical dramas one way or another for like decades on end, how do you think that it speaks to them, and how does it speak to you?
Start with the Richard, because I saw the production. It was phenomenal. It was just amazing. You're extraordinary.
Well, I'll take that. Oh, am I on?
No, nobody wants to hear.
Nobody wants to hear. I could project with my very loud Shakespearean voice. Thanks, Sandi. Well, I'll take that from you, Mr. Toksvig. Thank you very much indeed. To answer your question, and Victoria, big shout out to you. Abyssinians in Iran, I cannot wait to read the whole book. I just think it's, but I think if you're a creative person, you know, Sandi's fascinated by all these unsung stories of women throughout history, And that fascination takes her to create an almanac to fascinate other people and to spread the stories of these people so that unsung people, forgotten people, once known, now ignored people get to have a place in our knowledge banks again. They inform who we are by knowing about who they are. You, similarly captivated by these photographs that you came across, created this whole world, and now other people will come to that world. They'll know about Abyssinians enslaved in Iran. What does all that mean? They will be taken into a world where the possibilities of love between women in a court could happen. You know, and similarly with Richard II. Sorry, I'm wanging on. Similarly with... Oh, thank you, I'll wang away. Similarly with Richard II, what provokes me is what I'm speaking for all of us, and that may not be true, but what provokes me is the desire to be seen and heard, and I think that's what provokes every human being. And some people get more seen and more heard than others. And I think the desire to be seen and heard is equal amongst all of us. And so for those of us who have been less seen and less heard, we have an impetus to make those stories visible, audible, and present. So for me, Richard II, so for many of you who don't know, it's on YouTube, you can see it, but Richard II, it was being done as the history cycle at the Globe. Michelle Terry, that ran the Globe, and I got together, and she asked me if I'd like to direct it. She said it was going to be on during Brexit. I said, oh yes, please, the great love of England, the Shakespeare's great love letter to England, let me do that during Brexit, because I wanted to talk about what makes up this Great Britain. And there is no Great Britain without all the contributions, voluntary and otherwise, of the countries that Britain went to. There is no Bristol without the slave trade. You can do an equation between the number of black bodies stolen from the African continent, flogged in the Middle Passage, literally and monetarily, and the money that came back to Bristol that built the paving stones from Queen Square that connected Park Street to this other bit of Bristol called Clifton. I focus on Bristol because that's where I was born. You know, and you can go anywhere in the country and it's the same story. I film Bridgerton all around the country. I can't go into a stately home without seeing a little small carved head of a black boy, or a big glorious painting with a young black girl in the corner, or another black boy, sort of the latest fashion handbag, standing there holding a silver tray for his mistress. There is not a stately pile in this country that's not built on the blood and exploitation of people from somewhere else. That could be Africa, it could be Asia, it could be Southeast Asia. You know, you pick where you want. Wherever Britain went, success and wealth came back to this nation, and blood and misery was left behind. That's a really, you know, prosaic way of looking at it, but it fuels a certain perspective. And I think it's a perspective that it doesn't serve to highlight if you are continuing to exploit, or you're continuing to exploit the notion of Great Britain as a unique and self-sufficient state that did it all itself. And the contributions were mighty and frequently miserable and hostile. And the level of that hostility continues through today. So we still have conversations about, you know, why is there still racism in the police force? Why is everybody concerned this week about the return of stop and search? With no conversation happening even with the police forces. It's just the government's latest thing. Why have the RNLI been castigated this week for saving migrants on the sea? Why were, you know, the English football team taking the knee castigated by certain parts of the country as well? Because there is still a seam of a sense of people being less than that's around race. And that goes back to a time when you had to look at people as being less than in order to feel good about exploiting them for your Great Britain. for your industrial revolution, for all these, for all the great architecture that I adore. How do you afford capability, Brown? You go and steal some black people. How do you afford your industrial revolution? You go and indenture some Asian people. It's sort of relentless, and it just needs to be acknowledged, because then you have to look at the way that has freighted the opinions of generations going forward, that end up with, for example, my father saying, we're not going to live in Bristol, we're going to go live in the Cotswolds because I want my black children to have the chance of a decent education somewhere where the received wisdom is not that they are educationally subnormal before we even start, which is the case in Bristol. So that is why, when I got the opportunity to do the play, Richard II, during Brexit, I wanted to do it with a cast of women, because I wanted to talk about who are always at the bottom of the pile. Women are at the bottom of the pile, women of colour are at the bottom of the pile. So I wanted to do that play with not just an all women of colour cast, the fight director, the stage manager, the voice coach, the designer, the lighting designer, the programme notes, everything, women of colour. Why? Because we can.
Amazing.
So, and that logic goes through everything.
Amazing. I wasn't even stopping you, but I was just like, just has to be acknowledged. Like, all of what you said there, so fundamentally true. I feel like a really big part of it is the way it's untold, right? There's a really fraught relationship, I think, in the States, and you can certainly speak to this growing up in America as you did, but I think that at the very least there is an open acknowledgement, and there's still lots of things that haven't been talked about there, but there's an open acknowledgement that there's a direct through line as to how people got to where they are, whereas I think in the UK you have exactly the history you just reminded us of, but there's a real concerted effort to also say that we are good, to kind of say, we've got money and we're not going to talk about how we got it or how we got there. This is the region of the world that doesn't really have much in the way of resources. We're not going to talk about how we somehow seem to have so many and how we've made so much money. But we're going to have the narrative that we are good and we are great, and we're going to kind of peddle multiculturalism, and we're going to kind of clamp down on how, why, and it's this kind of, I almost think of it as like a, if you have almost like a pot that you've got a lid tightly pressed on and something kind of like poking out, and you get these weird sort of like versions of the truth kind of spitting out in your police force and all of that. So I really thank you for drawing attention to just the very reality of that. And I love the way you explained that about Richard II as well, because so often you'll hear, well, we're inverting X, Y, Z. But I think actually, just to be very precise about how, as you said, you're taking people who are usually seen at the bottom of the place of power and putting them in those roles, and sort of using that to subvert the way we look at things is such a really rich and I think quite clarifying way of sort of getting that thought process. So I really appreciate that, just from a sort of, just as a nerd, like just taking in information. But please, Sandi, the overall question was just about how it relates to you, just the idea of historical fiction, please.
Well, thank you, Adjoa. That's all we've got time for. Good job, you're my very good friend, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, as listening to you, and one of the things that I think about, you asked about historical fiction and why it matters. I think historical fiction is like the gateway drug through to actual history. I think it's a lot of the time we think that women of colour, lesbians, don't exist in history. And I think if you didn't think you existed anywhere, it's really hard to maybe have the ambition to be the monarch in charge. You did a thing where mostly the play is women having to pretend to be men, but the truth is that there are lots of women who were there who never get talked about. There's a wonderful book about women's history written by Rosalind Miles called Who Cooked the Last Supper? And it's such a great question because we've got the image of the 13 guys sitting having dinner, but somebody must have gone, who's having the fish? Who's having the fish today? And I think historical fiction is really important because quite often what it does is it introduces us to a world we may not have thought about. So I wrote a book called Valentine Grey. It's about a woman who dresses up as a man and goes to serve in the Boer War. I wanted to write about the Boer War. I thought nobody was going to be interested, so I try and make it into a piece of fiction that then maybe I can draw people in and say, have a look at it. But I was just going to do a very quick thing. about how women are left out of history. So I don't know if you know this, but Wikipedia, every day of the year, they tell you what events happened. So I thought I just had a look, August the 1st. It starts in 30 BC when Octavian enters Alexandria, Egypt. Before that, the whole world just taking the day off, I think. I don't think anything happened at all. And then as you go through, it's a lot of boys killing other boys. That's pretty much what happens all the way through. That Christopher Columbus finds Venezuela, which I think was a surprise. He thought he was going the other way. He was a bit of an arsehole. Speedwell, one of the ships that took the Pilgrims to America, arrived, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, women don't do anything. We take August the 1st off, almost entirely, until we get to 1911. And by then we think we must do something. We must do something. So far, we've done nothing at all. Here's the thing. Hands up, who knows who Charles Lindbergh is? Put your hands up if you know who Charles Lindbergh is. Quite a few. Hands up if you know who Harriet Quimby is. Literally nobody. Okay, so Harriet Quimby is the female equivalent of Charles Lindbergh, okay? And today, in 1911, she took her pilot's test and she became the first American woman to fly a plane. And she's really significant in history because she is the first woman who flew the Atlantic solo, but nobody knows her name. Bessie Coleman, do you know about Bessie Coleman? Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to pilot a plane. Phenomenal story. Phenomenal story. She worked in a nail bar, in a barber shop, and all the men came back from World War I. And instead of thinking, oh, I'd like to marry a pilot, she thought, I'd like to be a pilot. She could only take lessons, because she was an African-American woman, she could only take lessons in France, which would allow it. She learned to speak French. She used all her tips to learn to speak French. She went to France. She got her license. She came back. She became a huge star in the United States. She's fabulous. But maybe if you write a fiction about her, maybe if you read some fiction about her, maybe people would pay attention. She's amazing. So my point is that we need historical fiction to open up the idea that we were everywhere. It's just not been written about. There are women everywhere. There are fabulous, fabulous people of colour everywhere. There are fabulous lesbians. That's a really difficult story to find, actually, because mostly people didn't want to write about it. And I think it's the untold stories that we need to seek out. And women's history in particular falls through the cracks. It's found in the tiny details of history that often don't get written about. So, I mean, how wonderful to see you playing Lady Danbury in Bridgerton. It made me so happy to see that, because in fact there was a huge number of people of colour in the aristocracy that is, I don't know, for some reason we seem to have forgotten that was the case. So I don't know which one of us can talk more than the other. Yeah. Yeah, we can keep that count. Yeah, sorry, darling. Have you got another question?
Yeah. many, but really this
Your phone is ringing. Do you want me to get that?
Is it? I think you can throw it away, to be honest.
Yeah.
Who's calling me now?
No, I once answered the phone on stage at the Royal Festival Hall. It was my mother. I said, I'm working. She said, I won't be a minute.
No, I'll let that lie. But it's funny that you mentioned this about Bessie Coleman, because I didn't know that story, but a story that I've been really thinking about, and actually that I'm writing as part of my second book, thank you, Adjoa, for mentioning In the Palace of Flowers, I'm very touched, is actually the story of the negritude movement in Paris, where what you had is a story that we associate with these three black men, Aimé Césaire, Leopold Senghor, and someone else whose name I feel justified in forgetting, given how the story actually began. And what actually happened is that they went to these salons of these black women who held them in the 1930s. They were these salons for all manner of intellectuals of all kind of backgrounds, all ethnicities, just to come and talk about, you know, politics, about the issues of the day. And they basically stole their ideas and ran off with them and became famous for these ideas. And now we associate negritude with these three black men, and off we all went. And it's kind of like, huh. And now, you know, the repositories of information have been updated to the extent that they will give a small acknowledgement that we suspect that actually they got these ideas from these women that were talking about them before, that they sat in their houses and listened to all these years before. But that's kind of a footnote, and the larger story is still about these men. And I find it so compelling, so frustrating, the difficulties with having to wrangle that. And one of the things that I was, you know, that I really wanted to do with this book, and I think actually you really hit the nail on the head here, Sandi, about the way in which, if you can't see yourself in history, if you can't see a version of yourself, it puts a limit on what you think you can do. I think prior to the age we were living in, that we're living in now, especially the digital age, you had a culture that, especially in the UK, that just didn't talk about the history of, you know, say, Africa, broad continent as it is. And so someone like me spent a lot of time thinking, well, I guess African people didn't do very much. How, you know, where do I get this information? You know, and so when I came across this story, and it's so interesting, Adjoa, that you talk about this art where you have little black person in the corner, right? This was the first time I had seen photography of black people who were wearing robes. They were wearing the same royal robes as like the Iranian Shah himself. And they're actually looking quite sad, quite forlorn, but they're in robes, holding these children. I'm like, who are these people? How are they wearing the same clothes as the royalty of the country? How is it that, you know, the Shah's daughter has an autobiography and she casually mentions her first language is an Afro-Persian dialect because, you know, the nanny, like, wait, what? Like, the Shah's daughter in Iran first spoke an African dialect. Okay, casual bit of information that happened to all the children. You know, at one point in Tehran, the country, you know, the city was made up of 12% of them were black people. Where have they all gone? What is that story? There's so much we don't know. And one thing I was thinking, I guess I was thinking about the mediums we use, the genres, the sort of spheres, and I guess, and I'm probably going to be harping on a little too much about Richard II versus Bridgerton, but I'm interested in the way in which we've often thought of this as a global moment, and we can talk about how, you know, people were watching Bridgerton at this global time when we're also having this global crisis, but I'm interested in the way in which you had something, you know, just before that, because Richard II was in 2019, and I found myself thinking, well, was that a different kind of global moment? There's something about the kind of inclusivity that just felt like life. And so I'm wondering, like, are we in a different moment now, coming out of, you know, 2020 and that kind of strange year, especially also, you know, you wrote the Almanack in 2020 and it was based on like this sort of web series of all this information you had. I'm almost thinking so I guess I'm thinking on many levels, clearly on many levels here, but still, what almost are you, if one could hope, what are you hoping comes out of this year that people are able to take away from the work that you've brought to them in terms of knowledge? Because I feel like the Almanack is something of a starter guide in a way. It kind of is meant to like trigger you to go forward. And I'm almost thinking, is there a different expectation for you in terms of how people receive Bridgerton and what they then go on to think about themselves and the world they could sort of live in? Because, you know, in the UK we've had period dramas relentlessly. We've never had, you know, the idea that people could fit into it, black people could fit into it. The significance of this for me is that to the British, you know, audience, this is almost an invention. As you correctly point out, it's not. But our ignorance of this is such that it's like, what does it mean to kind of just rewrite people into history and then let people kind of go forward with that, like, as the story? How do those things... Yeah.
Well, I think everything that you've done, Adjoa, it does make me laugh actually, because the last time you were at my house when you were having dinner, I said, oh, come and do this little show with me. And you said, I can't, there's this little Netflix thing I'm about to do. And it just became this monster, but it was just, you were very dismissive and said, it's taking up a lot of my time. I said, oh, okay. But, we need the visibility of what you do. It's really, really important. The Almanack started as a series of chats on, I'd never done YouTube before, and it was a series of chats to try and keep people interested while they were locked down, because we thought initially it was only going to be for a few weeks. I don't know if you remember that. And then it just grew and grew, and I just realized, the thing about the Almanack, there's one woman for every single day of the year, and I have thousands more. I could write almanacs for the rest of my life. It's just a thing that you just want people to pay attention. You want them to wake up. Do you know about Ignatius Sancho? Oh, isn't that a great story? And how many people know? Who knows about Ignatius Sancho? Oh, can you talk about? So Ignatius Sancho was born in, well, I'm going to guess 1720, around 1720. He was born on a slave ship. He was a slave. He then was lucky enough, he had the gumption to run away, and he was lucky enough to be taught by the Duke of Montagu, and he became a playwright, and he was a friend of David Garrick, the great actor, and he ran his own shop, and he was an astonishing person in the 18th century. And I just, again, I don't know what it takes to get schools in particular to say, can we not have, I don't want to have Black History Month. Okay, I don't. I just want to have a thing where history is taught that it's full of every kind of human being.
Precisely.
And people of all sexualities and creeds and colours and so on have done everything. It's just that we don't get told about it. I mean, check him out, Ignatius Sancho, just a fantastic and extraordinary individual. And pretty much every story that I tell in the Almanack, you go, really? Really? Is that... so today, I think it's the anniversary in 1980 of the very first female head of state. I'd have to look it up. Thing's daughter, I think, in Iceland. Obviously Iceland. Obviously. Yes, clearly, obviously Iceland. Yay, Scandinavia. But we don't get told. We don't get told those stories. We don't know who cooked the Last Supper, right?
And interestingly on that, my youngest has just done she did a theology degree, and so I've instituted at my church a series on women of the Bible. Hello. And so last week she did Mary Magdalene, Jesus loved prostitutes. No, there's nowhere in the Bible does it say she was a prostitute. She was a woman of independent wealth. Oh, well, she's called the apostle to the apostles. Yeah.
Didn't the Vatican apologise, actually, recently for having said that she was a prostitute? I feel like there was actually a thing a couple of years ago where
I don't know.
We're sorry. Yeah, we're sorry, she wasn't.
But just that assumption that a woman could not be independently wealthy and have applied herself in this way without, being somebody we have to sort of welcome as a fallen woman who it's okay now because she loves the Lord. So I was talking with my friend Alice last night about the angle of the world that we are presented with and whose angle of the world we are given. Whether it's a crash test dummy that is of a male proportion so that women are more frequently injured in crashes because body types that are female are not factored into the production of cars. Something as ridiculous as that, or a chemical being developed that either could give a man an extended erection or help with pain for menstrual pain. Which way did they go with that? So it's just about an angle on the world that needs shifting because the world needs an equal perspective. So the lens that allows us all in is informed by the history that we learn and the way that we move forward. And to talk about Bridgerton, for example, for me, when I did Richard II, it was kind of to make a point. It wasn't to say this is historically what happened. I think you can be free with Shakespeare because I think Shakespeare, writes on the human heartbeat and encompasses everybody. But so what I'm loath to do is just sort of parachute in people in different ahistorical ways so that you can say, listen, we're doing colourblind casting and all that, because I think sometimes that's dangerous because I want to go, no, Queen Charlotte was mixed race. It's not a fancy that people decided, oh, we'll just make her brown because we're going into a new multicultural moment. She was of African descent because the trade between North Africa, Portuguese and the Spanish was relentless from the 14th century onwards. Yeah. And for me, I grew up in the Cotswolds near Badminton House, where the badminton horse trials happen, and the Duke of Beaufort's hunt is, and there we were filming there. There was a Lady Danbury sort of girls drinking and a carrying on party that we shot there, and the room that we filmed in had this enormous iconic painting of Queen Charlotte. And once when you look at her, you go, oh yes, I can see her African features and I can see the white paint that's been put over the top of it. And you can see that she has an African heritage. Now that's 4 miles from where I grew up as one of 3 black people in a tiny dairy village in the 1960s. For me to have known that painting existed, for me to have known as a little girl that there was a woman that looked a bit like me in that big fancy house, it's okay, you can be here, would have been terrific. And I think there are so many ways in which whatever aspect of ourselves we're feeling is unseen, for us to have known that we existed as pilots, as loving people of the same gender, as being scientists, as being whatever it is that we've done, to see ourselves in a position of possibility of having existed, and that it gives us the encouragement that we can exist however we want to going forward, feels to me the only work to be doing. And to do it funny, and to do it classily, and to do it with great verve, exuberance, and panache, absolutely. But to explore that content feels to me a worthy endeavour creatively. I
feel like every time either one of you speaks, I sort of want to go, applaud, go home, it's done. Right? Like, you're just like, yeah, this is all of it.
You should hear the two of us when we've got a bottle of vodka between us. It's not pretty. It's not pretty.
I suspect it's marvellous. I actually hope I do. I kind of want to ask you guys, on this subject, what does the role of escapism kind of have as a value? And I'll say, I guess, you know, when I wrote in The Palace of Flowers, what was really interesting is that my publisher was like, I like that there's no Western gaze here. Because it is literally set in an Iranian palace, and it's about black people, to just be really blunt about it. And it's in the 19th century. They're not thinking about they're not thinking about Europe. They're not Europeans. There's no connection there. But I was also really aware that I wanted to really focus on the lavishness of the palace, not just to make a striking reference to, you know, the discordance between who they are and where they live, but also on a really simple level. I like looking at palaces. I like the beautiful whatever. I like also having knowledge so that I can be seduced in it superficially whilst also having enough knowledge of what this means, where it is, why it matters and all of this. But I do also enjoy just kind of shutting off my brain off and just engaging. So I think I'm interested in something you said earlier, Sandy, and I've often found this with history, that, you know, I can read a history book and I find it interesting. I won't retain any information. I will read historical fiction, or I'll watch something that has like drama, emotion, and so forth, and I'll come away and I'll remember a lot more of the story. And so I'm wondering, even outside of that context, just, you know, for both of you, what does escapism, because, you know, Bridgerton is fun, you know, a lot of people are watching and they're just screaming about how hot, you know, Reggie Jean-Page, yeah, that's like.
I mean, I was literally on the turn for that young man. His bottom is astonishing, isn't it? Is that terrible of me to say that? I'm an old woman.
My boat is not floated.
No, your boat's not floated. I mean, mine wasn't completely, but no. Okay.
I mean, it was on show for a reason, so I think you're kind of thinking as they wanted you to. I think it's, you know.
Okay. I mean, the thing is that you're a writer, first and foremost. You don't have to fight the fight with every page, right? It's great that you are writing these stories. That's fantastic. You can also enjoy the Gilded Palace. It's fine. You know, we don't have to spend all our time marching. We can still be, you know, find things funny, and we can find things beautiful, and so on. The thing I would encourage everybody who's here, you're all here because you're interested in words and so on, but please, there must be somebody in your life, an older woman whose story you could take down, whose story will be forgotten. Because it is the story of I don't hate to use the word ordinary, because there is nobody who's really fully ordinary, but it is the unsung person whose story will not be told. And I really encourage you to find the neighbour, or the grandmother, or the great aunt, or somebody, and they will have. The world has changed so much just in my lifetime that to talk, for me, to talk to lesbians of the previous generation is really a phenomenal thing, because I see how much the world has changed. And I was speaking to an older person fairly recently, and she'd worked making maps on pieces of silk in the Second World War, so that they could be found rolled up so tight and put in the pocket of somebody who was going to be parachuted in to France. It was a completely fascinating story that otherwise I would... You know, I just happened to say, what was it like during the war? So please, all of you, have a think in your lives. There'll be somebody, and it's a story that 100% is worth telling. And actually the detail of what you talk about in the palace is the detail of somebody's life in a terraced house, or a detail of it is to me just as fascinating. Yeah. It's just as interesting.
Yeah. Yes, I used to live... in my tiny dairy village. There was, we had a low wall. I used to get in an orange box, climb over the wall, and go and see Miss Hall, who lived next door, because she had caraway seed cake, mint imperials, and a piano. And she would let me come and play her piano, and then she'd stuff me with goodies. And Miss Hall, so I must have been 4 or 5, and Miss Hall was in her late 70s then. So she was born in the 1800s, and she'd lived in this village all her life. And she would take me on walks to see her friend Miss Chapel, who lived up on the common. And they would talk to me about when they got a penny pocket money a week, and they'd have, so that was 4 farthings worth of sweets that they could get. And they would tell me about their lives and their childhoods. And those, obviously I don't remember all the detail of it now, but it's so precious. And you think that you're hanging out with somebody from the 1800s who was your age in the 1800s and the changes that they had seen by then. Or similarly, I could talk to my grandmother in Ghana, who used to go around on the back of a motorbike with her husband, who was surveying the country in the 1920s, and she played guitar in a palm court orchestra and was a bit of a flapper. You know, it's not the image that one necessarily has of West Africa then, but you know, so but they're just fabulous. Everybody's story is fabulous, isn't it? And utterly fascinating.
Yes, no, I just...
Anybody just wants to pick a random date in Canada?
Yes, so, yes. So, fantastic. So actually, yeah, we basically have to go to a Q&A, but first, really hoping that we'll let someone from the audience choose a month, a day, a date, a time, maybe your birthday. And Sandi has a story that she can read from her book that corresponds to that. So if you want to pick a time, a date, that would be fantastic. Do we have someone who's going to give a... Yeah?
He's out with his mic.
While we're waiting for the first question, can we just thank Ruth and Grace who are doing the sign for us?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Rob, are you there? Has anybody got a question? If there, just your birthday, whatever matter, anything you like.
We have one more person. Fantastic.
Hi.
I wasn't keeping my birthday, but I did have a question. So you talked about making the unseen seen, and does feel like that's often really exciting in historical fiction, is going to a story that we feel is familiar, but then kind of making it unfamiliar. It's happening a lot with Greek myths at the moment, being kind of retold from the female perspective. And I wondered, where would you go next if you could pick anywhere to go back to and to retell a story we think we know? Where would it be?
Well, I am always very interested I'm interested in I've read the whole of the Bible, I've read the whole of the Quran, I'm very interested in religious texts, I'm very interested in how, to the extent we slightly talked about how women have been left out. And I would love to try and, if you could, retell some of those stories. So I was just thinking about your women's thing. Tell her to look at Paul's letters to the Romans, because he talks about female bishops, Priscilla in particular.
Yes,
so the idea that that women were not there and were not in charge of the church and were not apostles. There's a very strong belief now that Mary Magdalene was in fact one of the apostles, and then you get the final books of the Bible written down 300 years after the death of Christ. And then you get women pretty much written out of the stories. I think it would be really interesting to go back and tell the stories, but remember that there were amazing women who were in charge of the churches. And for some reason, what Paul says in the letter to the Romans about women is completely ignored in his damning of homosexuals, is held up as the reason why homosexuals are a bad thing. I don't know why we get to believe in some of his letters. I also don't know why the Romans never wrote back. I don't know what that's about.
There's also, I don't know if you know this story, Sandi, but there's a book called Destiny Disrupted by Tamara Ansari, and it's basically the story of the history of the world from, he calls the middle world perspective, from the Prophet Muhammad all the way to the present day, and it's really kind of witty, sarcastic, funny. It's just kind of this rollicking read, and it made me actually think of the Almanack, even though they're quite different. But I think in light of the questions, suddenly I'm like, well, I wonder if, I thought that story was great, but I'm like, but there weren't that many women, were there? I wonder if we were to sort of retell that and put a few women in, speaking roles maybe as a thing. But something I would say to the question as well is that I personally am interested in the stories that we don't even know have not been told, right? To be brutally honest, I do not need a third Pride and Prejudice. A third, an 80,000. I really want the stories that we do not even know we don't know, and just bringing them out and and using historical fiction to kind of. I always think historical fiction does not rewrite history, but what it does do is it kind of fills that vacuum where people's stories should have been with a level of humanity that reminds us of who they are And I think that is a really important component that we can add to the sphere of actually forgotten stories, not just taking ones that where we already have a strong sense of the layout, if you like, and then kind of reminding everyone of all the other people who happen to live there as well, or just spinning the story, which isn't to reduce them, but I think it goes back to what we were saying about not being able to see yourself. So Audre Lorde was a really seminal figure for me because the idea of being black, being queer, being a woman just did not exist in any possible sphere that I could
And a
think
great
of.
big socialist as well.
Well, exactly, and a raging socialist, basically the best thing about her. But it was just, those things, I couldn't even see that I could exist as a person until I discovered who she was. So I feel like, yeah, that's my contribution to that.
There's a writer called Anne Cameron. I don't know if anyone knows her. Canadian,
Yes.
The great Anne Cameron. She, I sort of know her a little bit now, but she wrote a book called Daughters of Copper Woman in the 80s. She lives in Vancouver, and the First Nation tribe there, the Nootka people, that had a women's society. And they had collected all these stories together that were sacred to them, and they were told amongst the women, and as girls became women, they would join the society and they would be told the stories. And they shared all their stories with Anne, and they go right back to creation stories, the first boy child made by Mother Nature, called Snot Boy, made of snot and sand. And it goes right through to the arrival of, it goes right through to the arrival of the conquistador, and right forward. And I am really interested in all those Aboriginal stories that don't get written down in any form, that we can generally point to a historical document that says, oh, and then this happened there. Because I just think there are perspectives on the world and the world events that we know, which is seen from that other lens, give us a fresh perspective. If you look at an Aboriginal painting and you realise that you're above the earth looking down at the earth, the extraordinariness of that view, that's how a painter will see the world in that way. It's so out of my knowledge, and I just feel that that's something I'm really interested in exploring those stories from other perspectives on the world that we think we know, from an entirely different lens.
And women have done it for generations. There's the Mappa Mundi by the nuns of Ebstoft, which I think is, well, I'm going to say 16th century probably, which is their world view written down on one piece of paper, and it's just worth having a look. It's amazing. In fact, I was thinking doing a Mappa Mundi to go. I'm writing an atlas at the minute. I might put a Mappa Mundi in, it'll be great. Shall we have another question, my lovely?
Yes. Any other questions? Now we have plenty.
Hi. I know 3 extraordinary women in my family who were all born on the 14th of March. My grandmother and my twin daughters. So I wonder if you perhaps have another extraordinary woman we could hear about.
Love that.
Okay, 14th of March 1977, Fannie Lou Hamer dies. American voting and women's rights activist, a leader in the civil rights movement. Born in 1917, she became physically disabled due to polio and a severe beating in a Mississippi jail. In 1961, while having surgery to remove a uterine tumor, it just makes me cry, she was given a hysterectomy by a white doctor without her consent. The forced sterilization of black women to reduce the black population was so widespread, it was known as a Mississippi appendectomy. And then I add, please read her story, she is a legend. And I just, I mean, it hurts me even just when you read it out. And that's just random, just finding,
So whenever I read a new book, I try and read around it as well, and I mean reading reviews and so forth. And so I was reading reviews of this, and most of them are fantastic. There's some annoying white man who implies that there's somehow kind of like derivative. And I remember thinking to myself, I needed the light touch that you had. I needed the dark swiftness. I needed the wittiness, so I wasn't crying every time I read the story.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, you can't think it's derivative. Like, you can't think that because you can't even imagine what it is to inhabit a different body and be reading these stories. But I found, and it was one of the things that like just filled all the kind of questions I had about the value of using levity, of almost using something adjacent to kind of gallows humor to really just to make sure people remember the story, but that they're not just like traumatized every time they're opening the page. And I think that's such an incredible skill, because even with my own book, a lot of people, especially in like Gen Z, are like, it's really heavy. And I was like, okay, I didn't anticipate that you were gonna, yeah, I made it brutal on purpose. Oh, oof. But so I really, these stories can be hard. They really can be hard. And the book is so funny. The book is so funny. I'm so grateful for that. So,
wow, that's very kind of you.
Just have to affirm that it's a really, really important thing, I think.
Oh, well done. Anybody born on the 14th of March, that's
a great connection.
It's a hero, yeah.
Indeed. We have like tons of hands.
Rob, you got somebody?
Why did the,
Hi, I've loved listening to the audiobook version. I was just wondering, I need an encyclopedia for all the ladies who you've been mentioned, because every time you mention somebody, I want to read more of their story. But where did you get all the information from? You couldn't have relied on Wikipedia all the time.
Please don't ever rely on Wikipedia, is the first thing I would say. Women in Wikipedia exist in 9% of the stories in Wikipedia. That's it.
9?
It is 9%. It is one of the most male-orientated projects in the world, and unless we all start to contribute to Wikipedia and pay attention, in 50 years' time, that will be history. It's been written down, and therefore it will exist, and that is history. That women don't exist. So 90% is about men, 9% is about women. You think 1% is about horses and fencing. I think that's I don't know what the other 1% is, but it's really important that this is a crowd-sourced encyclopedia. And on the whole, of the 250,000 editors that there are worldwide, it is pretty much the same percentage that 90% of the editors are male. So please, I would encourage you. So that's not weird. What it is that carry a notebook with you. Every time I hear about somebody, then I go, oh, I didn't know about that. I write it down. I constantly, and I read widely, and I'm curious about the world. And gather them for yourself. Write your own almanac. This is honestly, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. We'll never tell them all. So please write one of you. I've done my bit. Now you write. You write one. I'm 125 countries into writing an atlas at the moment. That's nearly
hurrah!
Well,
amazing. I think there's something to be said, as you say, for sort of like taking inspiration from places that do not seem overtly lending themselves to it. As I said, this story in the Palace of Flowers came from seeing photographs, right? And then from like interrogating academics. You'd be surprised the number of academics who expect that people are not going to engage with their work. And so if you ask them, they will tell you, and they'll tell you way more than you actually thought you needed. Like, there's so much, but there's a lot of people also willing to share that kind of knowledge. I'm probably aware that we're probably like way over the time. We've got like four minutes. I kind of sneakily want to ask a question, but I will happily take someone else's question.
There are a couple of ladies that have had their hands up for yonks.
Yes. Right at the front, Just,
that one
and then the woman at the front. I feel like there's, people sit at the front on purpose, like, let's get a question at the end.
In 1972, on the 5th of June, I gave birth to my first daughter at the age of 15, and she was forcibly taken for adoption. So I'd like you to give me a few women back, please.
Wow, that was a question worth hearing.
This is so interesting because it's just, entirely random. 5th of June, 1893, Mary Ann Shadd dies. Born in 1823, she's fabulous. Shadd was the first black female newspaper publisher in North America. She founded the Provincial Freeman in Canada in 1853 to publicize the successes of black persons living in freedom in Canada. And in 1883, she became one of the first black women to complete a law degree. She's fabulous.
She is fabulous.
Just fabulous.
I love how many black women you have in there. Really,
that just gave me goosebumps.
Affirming.
Let's run to the one at the front, and then we must just stop because I need a cup of tea. Yes, Rob. This lady right at the front there.
That was you, Alice.
Oh, Alice, was it? Oh, right. Go on then.
Well, we just met today, me and Alice, and we found out we got the same birthday, which is International Women's Day as well, the 8th of March. So can we have one from them, please?
Nice.
So what I've written is 8th of March, International Women's Day. Yay, fireworks, we get a whole day. The ideal time to celebrate a woman without a specific date attached to her name. Christine de Pizan, or Pizan. She's fantastic as well. The Venetian-born poet, author, and prominent political thinker at the court of King Charles VI of France. She was born in 1364. She was the first professional woman of letters in Europe, and what a great place to celebrate her at this festival. She began writing to support her kids when she was widowed and is best remembered for defending women in the Book of the City of Ladies, in which she creates a literary city of famous females from history. What an excellent idea.
So like your literary ancestor and the anti-Wikipedia. Oh my goodness.
Supporting
okay,
her
so
kids.
thank you so much. We're bringing it to a close. I think that we will be signing books in the Waterstones, something nearby, I've been told. We've got about 15 minutes to do that. So if you want to have a copy, especially of the Almanack, let's be honest, signed by Sandi, please do head over there. Just want to say a special thanks to our BSL interpreters. Thank you, Ruth and Grace. Oh, why was I only told Ruth? Thank you, both of you. It's really, really invaluable work. We really appreciate it. And honestly, thank you, Sandi. Thank you, Adjoa. It's been incredible that I even get to be on the stage is like just the mission of what you guys are doing here that puts like me with these two. So thank you so much for that and for being great people to interview. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And congratulations to you too.
Thank you, guys.